Hello, Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy, the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, we're going to talk about L2. We'll talk about the L2 ecosystem and its relationship with DAOs. And we are so glad to be joined by Arjun Kalsy from Mantle Network. He's the head of ecosystem, trying to build a ecosystem that's really governed by the community. And welcome, Arjun.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's really interesting to look at the ecosystem of the Ethereum technology as being similar tech stack, but very different type of organization. And Mantle is unique, both in terms of technical aspect as a rollup, but also a new way of thinking about the relationship between DAOs and L2 structure. Can you tell us a little bit about Mantle Network and how it came to be, and how you came to kind of lead the ecosystem on this project?
Sure, definitely. I think you've nailed it there. That it's a very unique situation we find ourselves in. So typically, if you look at any sort of blockchain, it typically starts in a very centralized manner and then moves to a DAO and then decentralizes itself. We've started with a DAO, so we're already a very decentralized project. It's a very interesting story where BitDAO has been doing investments in the Web3 space, right? To take sort of Web3 forward, whether it's in education with EduDAO, whether on the gaming side with Game 7. So it was already, making investments and trying to figure out, how you can continuously push mass adoption of Web3. And the birth of Mantle started from a forum discussion where some of the forum members said that, okay, why don't we build some sort of infrastructure? And then there was this long discussion about what kind of infrastructure, what kind of chain. And literally that is kind of how Mantle came about. And then the DAO voted that yes, we should build a piece of infrastructure, and Mantle was born. So that's kind of the genesis of how we started this. Like,
Right.
again, it's very, very unique. Like, it's a different experience for me as well. But at the same time, you kind of see the advantages of such a model. I can maybe get into that a little later. Personally, for me, prior to this, I was head of BD at Polygon. I was there for almost close to 2.5, 3 years. So I've been in the Web3 space for some time, since 2016. So I've always been looking at like the ecosystem, how it's evolving, what has to be done, what can be done better. So last November, I sort of left Polygon and I joined the Mantle team. Again, I was like quite excited by this kind of an approach towards building out a chain,
Yeah,
building out an
absolutely.
ecosystem.
Literally grassroots, right? Like when the
Literally.
idea is germinating from the community, and then it kind of grew from that. It is a very different approach than the more kind of organized approach. So tell me a little bit about the technology first. So we are focusing on kind of having people understand not only the technical context, but obviously in the context of what does it mean for either developers or users. But tell me, with so many roll ups coming on to the scenes, a lot of them built on the EVM technology, some of them are anchored by the Ethereum security. What is unique about the Mantle model that unlocks the value in the way that the ecosystem is striving to achieve?
Oh, that's a great question. So with Mantle, I think it was pretty clear that we wanted to build a layer 2 ecosystem. So the entire treasury of BitDAO. So BitDAO is one of the largest DAOs in the space. The entire treasury is on Ethereum. So it just made total sense to build an Ethereum L2, very aligned to Ethereum's values.
Right.
I think you're right that there are a lot of rollups out there, which I think is great for Web3 in general, that the barrier to creating and running your own chain has reduced to such an extent where several teams across the world are able to build a roll up and successfully run those chains. I think that's amazing for Web3 and the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole. I think what makes Mantle very unique is the number one, the modular architecture. So if you look at blockchain design, there have been several discussions around monolithic architecture and modular architecture. And what we felt is that if we go with a modular design, then we'd be able to build a chain which would be much easier to run, much easier to upgrade. And because it's, again, all the layers are split into different parts. So you have the chain, you've got a data availability layer, you have a fraud proof layer, and then you derive security from Ethereum. I think the other thing which is unique about us is because we've designed with a modular architecture, we were able to integrate EigenDA as a data availability layer. So we've been working with the EigenLayer team for over a year now. And we've already integrated Eigen data availability. So we would be possibly the first chain in production using live data availability. It's live on the testnet. So I'd love it for developers and users to try it out and give us some feedback. From a developer's perspective, so we've gone with the OP stack as sort of the base layer. So what that means is that anything which works on Optimism, Arbitrum, Ethereum, like would work seamlessly on Mantle. So for the developer, for the user, it's a very familiar environment, all the same tooling, all the same APIs. So from that perspective, it's like really easy to build on Mantle. But with the added advantage that you also have a data availability layer, which means the throughput of the chain is higher, and at the same time, we're able to have like anywhere from 30 to 70% less gas fees than any other L2 out there.
Right. So what's interesting is that there's this mix and match going on, right? You can go with the compatibility that comes with the Optimism or OP stack, but then you can bring in new ideas such as data availability, modular blockchain. For example, Celestia is like one of the first pusher of that particular approach, and combine them and offer that to the customer. And from a developer point of view, what is the main, other than throughput, what is the main kind of benefits of the data availability layer being modular in that way?
100%. So I think the data availability layer, number one, solves a bunch of different problems. So typically in any layer two, you'd be posting both call data and the state root, which the sequencer produces onto Ethereum, right? So this is kind of, number one, it impacts performance because you have to push 2 transactions onto Ethereum. Secondly, it's very expensive because pushing anything on Ethereum is expensive. And at the same time, if you're pushing data, like roll up data onto Ethereum, then the expenses go up, right? And which is kind of a problem which rollups always have had, where they've been expensive. Not as expensive as Ethereum, but still expensive, where they can support DeFi use cases, but not so much on the NFT and the gaming side. We've kind of seen, that traffic go on more to side chains, right? So with higher performance, the fact
I
that
always say that rollups are surprisingly expensive.
Yeah,
they're surprisingly expensive. Like people are kind of like, oh, really?
No, true. And it was surprising for me as well, right? When I started using them, I was like, okay, this is kind of expensive. And then that's when I started like thinking, right, that for mass market use cases like gaming or like NFT communities, etc., like this is going to be a blocker, in the time to come. And that's what we kind of realized, that with data availability, you can push all the roll-up data onto a separate layer, especially in the way Mantle is designed, being modular. So what that means is that you're only pushing the state root to Ethereum. The data availability is on another layer. And if you want to recreate the proof on Ethereum, you could still do that. So fraud proofs are still valid, except that the data or the data availability is on another layer. And this drastically improves performance and reduces costs of using the network. And I think with, EIP 4844 and other things, the cost will only go down even further. So, bringing like layer 2s on par with any sort of sidechain in terms of not just performance, but cost as well, along with the added security.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to see that the product market fit from Web3 and in general, dApps has been kind of a small number of users with high value. So that's DeFi use case you're talking about. Like one transaction captures thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars worth of value, and then the cost of the transaction can be borne in that particular mechanism. There are certain use cases where you need large number of users, and the transaction value is much smaller, which means the gas fee is a much more important thing to optimize. Otherwise, it becomes basically economically unfeasible or unlikely to gain the adoption, especially if there's some subsidizing of gas fee on behalf of the user by the dApp provider. What are the use cases you're seeing from the ecosystem that when you can offer this type of cost advantage and speed advantage while maintaining compatibility and connection to the security layer, the economic liquidity and stuff like that? What are the use cases that you're most interested in this particular combination that you guys can offer? What are people jumping on as developers to catch on to that opportunity?
A great question. So I think what also makes Mantle unique outside of technology, right, is the kind of ecosystem which we have, right? And this kind of directly ties into the kind of use cases which can be built or which would be successful on Mantle, right? So Mantle is backed by BitDAO, right? And it's one of the largest DAOs in the space. We've got a lot of liquidity on chain, which we can channel. So obviously for us, building a successful DeFi ecosystem is really easy, considering we have our own liquidity. And furthermore, we're doing other things. We're building other new products, like a liquid staking derivatives protocol is something which we are researching, because we've got almost 270,000 ETH on chain, which we can liquid stake, which would, give us yield every year, which we could, plug back into the ecosystem. We could take the liquid stake token and liquidity provision any DeFi protocol on Mantle. So I think Mantle is just a very natural fit for DeFi. And at the same time, with the cost and the performance advantage, like you can do other interesting kind of products on Mantle. And this is kind of where things become interesting, right? Because as an ecosystem, BitDAO is also invested in Game 7, right? And if I were to cover the entire ecosystem, we have, all the investments which BitDAO has made. We have the support of Bybit, the exchange. So Bybit is one of the largest exchanges in the space. Bybit initially seeded BitDAO with liquidity when it was first formed. We have the venture arm of Bybit, which is called Mirana Ventures, which is an LP in almost like all the top funds in the space, like Animoca, Dragonfly, Pantera, Spartan, etc. We also have a few other companies in the mix. Like we've got another gaming company called Yeehaw Games, which is building interesting games and which is taking like Web2 games into Web3. There's another DeFi protocol called Apex Dex, which is an on-chain order book exchange. So our ecosystem is already like really huge, and we've got a huge number of users, a big community, and all of this before launch. And the token as well, which we plan to use for the chain, the Bit token, which is the same token as that of the DAO, is already listed on all major exchanges and has great liquidity. So all the problems typically which you have in a cold start, like the cold start problem of a blockchain, like all of those for us are actually already solved, right? We've got liquidity, we've got an exchange. So we've got the power to basically make any use case work. So we have a fair amount of gaming as well, and lots of gaming dApps which are deploying as well. And I think this is super important for any kind of ecosystem development, because a composable ecosystem requires everything. Like you require DeFi, you want gaming, you want NFTs, and then you want all of these protocols sort of working together, like, taking each other's liquidity, adding, creating new kinds of use cases. And this is a kind of ecosystem, a highly composable ecosystem, which has all of these different types of protocols, has the highest chance of success over a period of time, because users can then cross-pollinate. Like a gaming user can try DeFi, a DeFi user can try NFTs, an NFT user can try gaming. And when protocols work together and create new and newer value for the user is when the network really starts to expand and gain traction. So the way our ecosystem is designed, you can virtually build anything. Like for DeFi, we have the liquidity. For gaming, we have the companies. And also for ecosystem development, we have an exchange where we can list tokens. We've got a fully functioning venture arm. And a $200 million ecosystem fund as well. So we have that ability as well. So I think like it's very interesting for us at Mantle, where we can basically do anything. And like now we have the carte blanche, thanks to the love of the community, to go out there and build, one of the most largest and most sort of impactful communities in Web3.
Yeah, it's interesting. The word composability is a kind of an adjective, so kind of thing where it's a capability. But if it's like, Legos are composable, but when you go to a Lego store, they have a lot of Legos. That's even more composable because all the stuff's there, right? You just bring your skills and creativity, and there are certain that we have Lego is composable, but I have 3 pieces. That's not going to be very, very. You can't make anything interesting of that. So that's really important. But your hope is that people will bring more Lego block in there. So. In the gaming world, one of the things I've seen is that games are either that there's 2 kind of separation. One is, can we inject the principles NFT and Web3 into an existing Web2 game? And then there's Web3 native gaming, which is essentially still not getting to a point where people are playing it primarily for fun. So they have fun on Web2, but they're poor. and they have less fun on Web3, but they're participating in something more interesting and possibly more thing. Are you seeing, which side do you think will end up seeding the actual real Web3 enabled gaming ecosystem?
So
if you were to kind of predict the future.
Sure, definitely. So this is so interesting, right? So gaming is in Web3 has gone through this full circle, right? Where we saw this play to earn kind of dynamic, and now we're seeing different dynamics with NFT. At the end of the day, gaming at its heart is designed to entertain, right? So at the end of the day, a game cannot succeed if it's not a great game. Like, blockchain adds abilities or different functionality to this game where you can own assets, you can build these kind of economies around tokens. But blockchain by itself cannot, like, let's say, create a great game, right? So this is kind of what I'm seeing in the space right now, where there's a return to what gaming actually should be. That the only Web3 games which should succeed will be games which are actually games at heart, and then have the added advantage of NFTs and token economies, which then allow you to sort of unlock new capabilities and new kinds of value for the user. And this is the kind of gaming which will succeed with time. And I think all gaming companies, all game developers also realize this, right? So I feel with gaming, we're moving in the right direction. I think in terms of value creation for the user, of course, if a user is spending their time on playing a game, yes, you can find ways to reward them. But the reward mechanism cannot be the only driver of the game, right? Because then it's a DeFi app. It's not
Right.
it's not really a game. So this is kind of what has to happen, is that gaming needs to go back to its root. A game has to be fun to play, and then you build these new kinds of mechanics around that game, versus building a game around these mechanics. So that's kind of what I see. And of course, now there is this
Absolutely.
other, new category of fully on-chain gaming as well, which is another interesting category, right? So because you have sort of a full discoverability, right? Data is always available on chain. You can build interesting kinds of games, which is again like a very, very interesting new area which I'm seeing right now. Because especially now the chain performance supports it, right? So if transactions are fast enough and they're inexpensive enough, you can put more things on chain, which means now you can do lots of fancy things with respect to on-chain interactions. So that's another side of gaming which is becoming very interesting, which I've been keeping a close eye on. But then, like I said, a game has to be a game. It has to be a game first. So yeah.
Yeah, the way I look at my own personal feelings on games is that the truth is the Web2 game developers who are bigger, like the international companies, are adding a lot of financial features, like through virtual currency, and it's actually making the game less fun. But in no way, if you're playing the game, you feel like completely at the mercy of and being taken advantage of so far.
Yes.
So it's not like the Web2 people are not adding; they're just trying to add these type of layers of financialization without having the user being part of it. They're always just at the end, kind of like paying the money and feeling like, did I buy this pack and I'm a sucker for it. So there's a really new dynamic that needs to incorporate not just the player and the user, but them as fully human, and what does it mean to be part of a game environment the way a more organic game server versus a corporate server needs to do. So there's a huge design space that I'm hoping that we will explore more, especially with the tools being available.
No, 100%. But I don't necessarily see using, blockchain as payments as a negative thing, right? Because I think it's the way I see it is it's great that some of the largest gaming companies in the world are at least experimenting with this technology, right? And this is kind of how it starts. Like if you think about the advent of Web3 as well, it started with Bitcoin, right? It started with payments. And then today we have this huge Web3 ecosystem with smart contracts and all sorts of on-chain interactions. So this is kind of how it starts. So I think it's still good that gaming companies are starting with payments and experimenting and sort of dipping their toes with this technology. But I think the core value prop which you talked about, right, which is around community ownership, community value generation, I think those are very core to the ethos of Web3. And I think the large gaming companies, the ones who are able to get this balance right, are the ones who are going to be most successful and will be able to build the most amount of value in the Web3 space.
Right. So let's shift the focus a little bit on kind of other use case. Obviously, one of the use cases that's been growing as another way of bringing new users onto the platform is social. And social is one of those, again, small numbers, big number of people use case. What's your feeling on Web3 social, whether that's the mass market kind that is being pursued right now, or the more kind of vertical micro network aspects of it? Do you see those use cases emerging, and especially emerging on the Mantle network?
Oh, 100%. I think the way we've designed the chain, we would I think social apps would scale really, really well on Mantle. And we have the ecosystem support to make those apps a reality and help those builders out all the way from zero to sort of grants to investments on all the way to listing and ultimate distribution. I think on the social side, it's definitely a very exciting space. We've seen like with Lens protocol, for example, some of the things which are possible when you have like a generalized social layer on which developers can build. There are some other approaches like Farcaster where, there's some other interesting dynamics which are coming. I think it'll have to be or rather the future would be a combination of both of these things. So I think micro networks as well and macro networks as well, right? So you would see equal parts like video sharing type platforms like TikTok maybe, but which are running in a decentralized manner. But then you would also see these emergence of micro networks, right? For example, you would have creators who can now move from, let's say, the current generation social applications like Instagram maybe, and go on chain and then be able to build more value for not just themselves but for their community as well. So those would constitute smaller micro networks, right? And this could happen across art, across gaming, across music, and all the different types of communities we see in our daily life. So I think this is the magic of Web3, where the base infrastructure allows both of these networks to exist at the same time and succeed at the same time. and it's not a either or solution, right? This is kind of like what's unique about Web3 in general, that protocols can actually work together, grow together, and build value together, versus Web2 where it has to be only one at the cost of the other. So I expect both to succeed, micro and macro networks. I think the infrastructure is there. I think the chain performance is slowly scaling to the point where we can build these kind of networks and give users the kind of user experience they're already used to, where transactions would be fast, the user onboarding would be seamless, the experience and the interactions would be Web2 like in some sense. And I think we're very close to getting there. And so this is, I think, the other really, really large use case, which is sitting in front of all of us, right? And everybody's trying to figure this out. And I think we're very close to it being cracked, right? And you just need this one killer app to solve this, and then it'll be a solved problem. So I think social space is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, when it comes to social network in the Web2 space, they're getting increasingly focused on owning all the user data, and you can see that actually even shifting to AI, which is like OpenAI, which was a research company, and they built API, and now it is really successful user interface. So it seems like whenever someone gets a user interface and then capture the user, they forgot all the principle, whether you used to be a nonprofit, whether you want to be a community network, they turn off links, they opt you into every arbitration and stuff like that. Do you see the Web3 providing an alternative to these kind of user interface level capture? Obviously dApp development is one thing that is still very much centrally hosted, even though the backend is on a blockchain. Are you seeing people experiment with decentralized hosting, maybe local first development that is allow the kind of client interface, the one that the user is interacting with, that still kind of maintains some sort of decentralization versus one dApp becoming the future TikTok of Web3? You know what I mean? What's your sense on the UI layer?
So this is a very, very interesting question, right? Kind of slips under the radar most of the times, where people don't realize that while the backend is decentralized, the front end is still very centralized, right?
Right.
Right.
DNS system, like, not ENS, it's like plain DNS on hosted servers.
Absolutely, right. So this is kind of where technologies like ENS, right, and blockchain domains become interesting. So for example, you could host a website, of course, on GoDaddy or any of one of these services, but you could also do that on Filecoin, right? So alternatives exist, right? And they are getting there. And you can kind of see with dApps these days where they will have both of these interfaces. They'll have the DNS interface simply because, it's compatible. It's something which we know it works. But in case as a fallback, you will always have this decentralized interface, right? Which can never be turned off. Simply because it's decentralized. So this is something which is catching on. It's very interesting that you brought this up. Not a lot of people talk about this, but it is something which is catching on. I think it should become a norm in the Web3 space, as sort of networks and folks like us, leading the charge and trying to get more and more Web2 companies and users involved. Like, we need to show them these possibilities that, hey, you can build an interface or a UI completely decentralized, just like a backend. So already I think the technology exists, and we will see more and more adoption on this side in the time to come. I think on the OpenAI topic, right? So this is very interesting. So first thing, you have to commend OpenAI for creating something like ChatGPT, which puts AI in the hands of the common man. Like, if you think about it, like, AI has existed for some time, but it was always
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
very different in people's minds. Like, the first thing would be like Terminator, or something would come to people's minds, right? But
Right.
when you create an app like this and you put it in the hands of people, it automatically clicks like, okay, this is AI. This is what AI can do. And this is exactly what we need to do for Web3 as well. Web3 requires a chat GPT like app where people can use it and then
Interesting.
immediately
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
clicks. This
Yeah.
is Web3. This is what this means, right? So I think with Web3, all of us in the ecosystem have to work towards this kind of an outcome. And if we can figure out that killer app and that killer use case and put that in the hands of the common man, then we will sort of see that real adoption, right? The similar like trends which we saw in AI, which is slowly, and then all at once,
Yeah. Yeah.
we would see the
Absolutely.
same dynamic play out in Web3. And of course, like, you brought up this very interesting point about, user data, right? And, it's actually not the Web2 company's fault also. And I'll tell you why. Because the entire business model of Web2 social networks revolves around owning the user, right? So the only way they make money is through targeted ads, right? And for that, you have to profile your user. There's literally no other way. Right now
Right.
in Web3, it's very interesting where, suppose, let's say, Chris, I have your wallet address, right? I can see all the activity you're doing on chain, I can
Yes.
still profile you, but I don't know who you are, and your identity is protected. Right. So
Right.
I can make a guess of who you are and what your characteristics might be. For example, if I see you play certain games, if I see you access certain dApps, I can maybe make some assumption that, okay, these are what are Chris's interests. These are the things he spends money on. And maybe this is what I should position to them, position to him. Right. And this is interesting because you could still build the same business model, but it would be in a way where your identity is protected. Right. So this is
Yes.
kind of what I feel what Web2 companies need to realize about Web3, that your fundamental business model still doesn't need to change. You can still show ads. You still know the user really well. In fact, I would dare say you know the user better because you have all the activity, right? And
For
and
sure.
and if you have
Yeah.
EVM networks, and if you're using MetaMask, for example, you would be able to track activity across different networks. But our identity, our names, our personal information is protected in this use case. So I do expect to see that Web2 companies will come around to this kind of thinking. And this is also interesting where the data is available to everyone. So it's not as if Google or Facebook or Meta in this case like has access to the data. Everybody has access to the same data. So now the ones who will be able to derive value are the people who will be able to understand you the best. Right.
Yeah.
So this is fundamentally a little more difficult, but possibly the best kind of value you can build for a user, because that means the only way, any of these companies can actually make any money is if they're able to understand Chris better, and if they're able to, for example, position the right kind of, or rather create value for Chris in some way. Right. And that's when Chris will say, you know what, this is great. Right. I'll click on this, or I'll buy that NFT, or I'll try out that DeFi app, or something like this. So the fundamental business model actually doesn't change. It's a new twist on it, and it's a lot more fairer because now everybody from the largest company to the smallest company has access to the same data. So
For
now the
sure.
focus has to be on
Yeah.
value creation.
Value creation and that kind of true form customer relationship
Yes.
management, right? Like not CRM as an acronym and a jargon, but actually going back to the root of it. It was really interesting. We did a proof of concept with a team of master students at New York University, NYU here, and the project was using publicly available data about NFT ownership to create essentially a loyalty program
Very
where you
interesting.
can tier users from gold to platinum, silver. A little bit kind of simple, but to think about a Web3 loyalty program that is not owned by one company, but by taking an analysis of all of the, project you participate in and analyzing things like length of holding, trading, flipping kind of characteristic. It was done using relatively standard Python data technology in Jupyter Notebook.
Makes
But,
sense.
they were able to kind of paste in your wallet address, and the dashboard tell you what tier you are based on, again, a first cut data science. Can you imagine if that get better? And that data is available to all. And if we publish that result in the data availability, then anybody can pull on that and token gate on those type of analytics. Instead of just saying, oh, are you binary owning or not owning at this moment? You can actually look at history. And that was a really interesting project. It took some time to kind of unwrap all these addresses and wasn't using Dune Analytics as an analytics platform, but was as a data extraction platform, and then use Python to do that. To see that project evolve over the semester, it was like a capstone project for the master's program. And I was kind of the client on that to provide that thing. It was really interesting to see the opportunity for the practice of customer data to shift on chain using the same tools. A lot of those students had previous experience working for Web2 companies. And now they're exploring Web3 data. It's a fascinating thing. And you're right. It's the same tools, the same business model, just on a different data set with a different outcome.
100%. 100%. I think this is such a super interesting study, right? It kind of proves that you don't need new fancy tooling, and the same tool chain which all Web2 companies are used to, you can reuse exactly the same
Yeah,
tool chain. Right. So it's
exactly.
a really easy transition. It's not so complex. So yeah.
Not at all. I mean, once you get the data cleaned up and you're doing k-mean clustering, it's a k-mean clustering no matter what you do, right? One of the things we didn't get to, but that we know we can do is to take that information and then actually write a Merkle root on chain, so you can actually check the status of people and have that govern mintings. Okay, you're like in the F tier, so I'm not going to let you mint my project because some people I trust. It's almost like a credit score of sorts, but it's again against anonymous data and the wallet addresses versus individuals. So case in point, I think, I think that is being worked on right now. It just hasn't reached that kind of deployment stage yet, but it is really interesting to see that happen. Let's touch on one other aspects around governance. Obviously, with the genesis of BitDAO and the activity we talked about that, there is definitely something to govern. What is your feeling about governance tools in Web3? Is it good enough for us to govern the treasury and the network? Is it good enough to use this governance tool to govern other network, maybe AI, registries and stuff like that? What's your sense of the maturity tool, and is that a product that Web3 ecosystem can offer the rest of the world, based on your experience?
Very interesting. So I think so. Let's cover the tooling part first, right? So there is a lot of tooling out there. There are a lot of DAO tooling providers who've been very successful at sort of creating the kind of tooling which works for like a large subset of DAOs. So for example, Aragon is a great project which has done some phenomenal work in this space. There are lots of other DAO projects which have managed to create sort of this tooling layer. Even at Mantle, at BitDAO, we actively develop tooling for DAO management. It's interesting for us because we're able to try that out for ourselves.
Right, dog food it.
Yeah, exactly, dog fooded, right? And then sort of get a sense of how this works, whether this works. But I think the core question, right, before you get into tooling, is to understand how and when you have to use governance, right? So imagine a country, right? Typically in a country, in a democracy, what do you do? Like you have elections. Every man gets one vote. You vote into office certain leaders who you feel represent your values or the outcomes you want, right? And then those leaders have you could say a carte blanche to go out there and make decisions, right? So all of us have a say, but at some point we choose someone who can make great decisions for us. So not everything which you do in a country is run by governance, right? And this is kind of where it's so important to understand where you have to use governance and where you don't have to. So I'll give you an example. So in Mantle's case, right, all critical decisions which involve the future of the ecosystem or capital calls from the DAO require a governance vote. So for example, our ecosystem fund required governance, the birth of the chain required governance, like several things we're doing around the token, around ecosystem design required governance. But for day-to-day decision making and for day-to-day running of the chain, the team is empowered to make decisions as they see fit. So in some sense, by voting, for the project, for the birth of this project, like in some sense, the DAO is also sort of voted for a team to go out, go out there and do whatever it takes to make this ecosystem successful, right? So it's important to understand the nature of governance, where you can use it effectively, where you maybe cannot use it effectively. It also requires some experiments. So for example, at Mantle, we want to experiment with this, try and involve the community as much as we can, and also try and figure out, which decisions would be optimal, which would not be optimal. For not optimal decisions, is it a tooling problem or is it a governance problem in general? Right? Maybe better tooling, we could take certain decisions. Could we do something similar? Like, for example, every man gets a vote, but then they vote into, vote a committee into place, right? Which can take different decisions. So then you can have a technical committee, ecosystem committee. So there's several ways in which you can involve your community in governance. I think the North Star always is that as much community involvement as you can is always better for the project. It makes it more decentralized. You have more opinions on the table. You have more data. You can take better decisions. But at the same time, a lot of this will be figured out through experimentation, right? And we will arrive at a model where we will have an optimal understanding of when we should involve governance, what kind of tooling is required to enable this governance, right? So that we can meet those kind of outcomes, which have been defined by the community for this project.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's like two things simultaneously looking at the past. It's like, representative democracy works and we can learn from that. On the other hand, I always wonder, like, in the US, they say like the Congress is in session or is in recess. And I realized that when the US was first formed, you have to travel like a month to get from Maine or wherever to Washington, D.C. It's a long trip, right? It's horses, right? There's no automobile. And there's this built-in assumption of this distance. And, we've taken away that distance, both in terms of travel and digital tools. But there is still some aspects of just human system that needs to be thought through. And I think the experimentation with Web3 and the tools we're building allow us to try things. I'm a big respect of human nature. I think human nature defines the outcome more often than anything else, but technology does change the dynamics that human translate or connect, and that does change the outcome a little bit. So it's the Steve Jobsian like technology and humanities intersection. Both of them are active ingredient in a way to interact with each other in a new interesting way. So I absolutely think that there needs to be experimentation.
100%, 100%. And just like you said, right, that technology is at the end of the day is an enabler, right? And then the better technology you have, the more enablement you can have. And then only when you have that level of enablement can optimal decisions be taken. So both are important. Like you said, that Venn diagram where you have human nature and you have technology, I think somewhere in the middle is where sort of the magic lies. And it
Right.
is our duty to, try all sorts of experiments, build all sorts of tooling to make that a reality.
I think Web3, the magic sauce of Web3 is coordination, right? Whether it's coordination at a low level within the chain, coordination of getting miners in a Bitcoin sense to get involved. That was a coordination mechanism to have people work together but work against each other at the same time. Co-opetitions, hate to put the consultant hat on and use those kind of 80s words. But these are all ways of saying that push and pull is really what human systems are made of. What excites you the most about the coordination opportunity in Web3? Just zooming out a little bit beyond governance. What do you think we can coordinate? What would be the most valuable thing that using the tools we have today that we can help the world coordinate something?
This is very interesting. So I want to answer this question in layers, right? So I think the most ultimate coordination tool which exists in the world is the smart contract, right? A smart contract allows anybody from across the world to trustlessly interact with each other, right? So I think the most powerful tool which we've developed for human interaction is actually the smart contract. So this is when you look at interactions at a global scale, right? But what's also interesting about Web3 is the nature of Web3 is also remote, right? So teams work remotely. People are based all over, in different time zones. Similarly for Mantle, we have a very distributed team, very decentralized sort of decision-making process. So sometimes internally also, I kind of think about these problems, like how do you bridge the gap between synchronous and asynchronous communication? What kind of tooling do you need to use so that you can sort of not have to be on a multitude of calls every day with team members, but still be able to achieve outcomes with, let's say, the minimum number of, let's say, calls in some sense, right? Where you still have human interaction and you're still coordinating, right? But you're able to get work done. And I think this is the kind of North Star for me, where within the organization, we have to figure out the kind of tooling so that whenever we do have conversations, those conversations actually should be conversations about each other versus about work all the time. And the work should be able to be managed through effective tooling and coordination systems. So interesting when I look at global coordination, for which the smart contract has turned out to be is the ultimate answer. But even within the community, across time zones, right? What kind of tooling is required so that whenever we do interact, we talk about life and important things, which make us human, versus while all the work related stuff and all the, let's say, productivity related stuff we're able to solve asynchronously and still be able to move towards a common goal, which is a very interesting problem to solve in itself. So that's kind of what I feel about the nature of human coordination, right? Or what I've learned from the ecosystem, like from blockchain and from sort of being in the ecosystem and being in a Web3 company at the same time. So it's quite interesting.
And I think more people are experiencing that kind of a duality of in-person and remote, right? Because everybody through COVID around the world has been very remote, and there is, there are a lot of people who want to revenge travel. They want to come back and like, I'm going to travel to all the places I couldn't go in the lockdown. But when they come together again and say, hey, do I really need to have this meeting to sign this one contract and travel 10 hours? And there's certain things that can be done digitally. So I think we're rejiggering the remote, the human, the social, the productivity, the financial settlement, the objective decision making, the subjective campaigning, for like a better way of doing on the channels. Those are all, they have all new design space for them to resit on this platter of possibility. And I think we're all experimenting with it. And I'm really hoping that the Web3 tooling provides another ingredient as people, society, not just Web3 ecosystem, society in general, rethink, back to office. Does that make sense, right? Back to conference. Does that make sense? And when does it make sense to do in person? I would go to conference entirely on conference check and drop the talks, right? There should be a quota where you have to have watched 3 YouTube video pre-recorded so you can actually know. And they're going to ask you a question before you can join a room, but then you can sit down with people who watch the talk and talk to the person for, I would like to have that conference. Like, but there has to be homework. You can't just show up not knowing anything, right?
I think that is so interesting, right? It kind of shows you that the North Star of what a conference needs to be. See, nothing beats in-person human interaction. Right? As
Not at
human beings,
all.
we are social creatures, right? But it would be so amazing that if you're able to move towards a world where the tooling and all is so optimized that when we do meet people, even at conferences or even at offsites, we do it to get to know each other better versus,
Yeah,
oh, I need to travel so that we can sit together and work. Like you should be able to do that remotely. And when you do sit
exactly.
together, you bond with each other and you get to know
Hmm.
each other better. And I think if we can move towards that kind of outcome, then that is the best outcome. And and and
Absolutely.
and if you start to look at it as a problem you need to solve, then a lot of these things tend to make sense. Then you start looking at tooling, you start looking at interactions, start looking at productivity and all of these different things.
Exactly. And I really want, the Web3, community to kind of feel proud of the fact that this is the first truly remote way of working together with people you may have not met in your real life and you meet. And it is actually next level. Like it's the next journey that people have in, compared to traditional, venture funded or like, enterprise organization. So we actually have something to teach, not just because we have some smart contracts and tools, those are important. That's the differentiator, that's the active ingredient. But the way we practice around that, it's actually the future of work in a non-ironic sense, right? Like we are experimenting sometimes by necessity. What does it mean to have a group of people that disorganized, starting to get more organized, and still maintain some personal boundaries that the Silicon Valley parody of like having to completely buy in to the Hooli lifestyle. That is certainly not the case. I mean, there is certainly kind of like cliques and groups here, but the fluidity, the way people move back and forth, and yourself included, to be able to kind of spread your learning and kind of experiment new things. The speed of that evolution is so fast. I'm sure we're gonna figure out something.
No, 100%. I think with remote work and especially with Web3, the sheer number of people working at this problem, I'm pretty sure we'll figure this out. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think what happens is that we want people to unwrap this and say, when we talk about DAOs, that these decentralized autonomous organizations, it's first and foremost an organization of people.
That's true. That's true.
Right. Second of all, decentralized in the way that people can be kind of participating in and out. And it's autonomous, not necessarily because, the things are all automated in a smart contract logic sense, but there's autonomy in the people, there's autonomy in the objective rules, and there's coordination around the organization. So I think really understanding what DAO can be by not looking at the acronym as some sort of defined box, but as a set of tools where we can shake the D, shake the A, shake the O, recombine them, and see what we can get.
No, that's really, really well put. You're right. Like the autonomous actually should stand for autonomy. And
Autonomy, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So it's really exciting to see the ecosystem, the Mantle ecosystem, and from the BitDAO ecosystem kind of experiment and grow. And obviously, if developers or users are interested in finding more about how they can participate in this ecosystem, where do they find you guys?
100%. So please do check out our website. We have all the different information there. You can check out our governance tab where we have all of the different tools we have for governance. Check out our forums where proposals get posted. Check out our developer page where we have got all the developer documentation. There are details about our grant program. So we've got several ways to engage users, whether you want to be a participant in the DAO, whether you want to put forward a proposal, whether you're a developer, whether you just want to check out what's there on the ecosystem, right, and try out some of those dApps and participate. I think all of that information we've baked it into our website now, so I encourage you guys to check it out. Follow us on Twitter where we share a lot of the information about our network, all the latest updates. Join our Discord if you're a developer. Like lots of interesting information there, lots of information about the different hackathons which we're doing at any given moment of time. So I just encourage you guys to be a part of the community. Give us feedback. check out our website where you'll find all of these links, and yeah, just be a part of Mantle.
So it's mantle.xyz from now and
Yes.
forever.
That's
That's a
that's
new.
that's how it is, right? And also it's interesting that we're also going through this very interesting rebranding phase, right? So BitDAO is also rebranding to Mantle DAO. So it will be one ecosystem which the user or the developer or the token holder or the people involved in governance, all of them are interacting with just one brand, which is Mantle. And we're also redoing the token because the original token design did not count for on-chain interactions. It wasn't designed to be a chain token. So we're redoing the token as well. It'll be called MNT. So more details will be shared in the time to come. We'll do a token swap, and then sort of move forward as a singular brand, right? And this is very interesting for us. It's a new evolution because Mantle DAO is will be a product focused DAO, right? If you look at the different products which we have the Mantle chain. We're building a liquid staking derivatives protocol, and if the community so chooses, they can put out a proposal about which is the next product they feel we should build, and then another new team will be born, and we'll sort of build that product out. So that's kind of how we want to work within Mantle, because we have all the different moving parts. We have the community, we have the treasury, we have the exchange, we have the ecosystem. Now all we need to do is just figure out which will be the best products to build, which would create the most amount of value for this ecosystem and for Web3 as a whole, and then bring those products to life. And all of these decisions will be made by the DAO through governance vote.
So interesting to take your genesis of the fact that it wouldn't have Mantle wouldn't have existed without the community. It's kind of grassroots thing, and continuing that, and it's very respectable. And it certainly opens up the design space and opened up the possibility space. And I'm really excited to see as many experiment happening, and maybe one of them become the Chat GPT of Web3. I saw this tweet today where the people in in OpenAI didn't think much of it. They thought it was like, yeah, it was cool, right? Show it to their friends, 30, 40 friends, and they were like, yeah, that's cool. But they didn't understand that what they knew, what they were intuitively understanding about AI was not shared with the world. And that recognition from the rest of the world of what is that frontier of AI was only made possible when you just make a chatbot. So we need to find our chatbot.
There are so many parallels here, right? Like within Web3 as well. Like, people who are within the ecosystem, we know all of this stuff.
Yes.
But
we take it for granted. We
take it
forget
for
how
granted.
exciting it is when we first heard about
Right?
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And somehow we need to find a way to share that
Yes.
with the rest of the world. So I think you're absolutely right. Like that sort of use case has to come. And I think everybody in the community within Web3 as a whole needs to work towards that outcome.
Yeah, that's our responsibility.
Yes.
We've gotten enlightened. We know what it means, and we have to find ways to share that. It's almost sharing your favorite brand, right? You got to get the word out there, right? Like something, and it's not just for you to enjoy. It's really to bring more people into it.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Arjun, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we covered a lot of topics, and the thing that I think is most important is the fact that this product driven approach, the fact that most people will engage with the product. Ideas are understood after the experience with a concrete product. So that's definitely what we need to push towards. And it seems like that's the direction you guys are taking.
No, 100%. And it's also interesting where, the DAO is the arbiter of this all, right? So like what we've seen before in the ecosystem, right? If you talk just about value creation, the chain and the exchange model, working in tandem has already proven to be a model which creates a huge amount of value for the user. But what we've seen is when the system runs without any sort of checks and balances, it does not lead to optimal outcomes, right? And
Right.
we've seen this in several of these ecosystems, right, where a chain and exchange are working together, but it is not leading to the optimal outcome. And this is where Mantle is very interesting, that we have, in some sense, our ecosystem has our own SEC, right? Except that it is the type of SEC which actually, like how SEC should be, which is the DAO, right? The DAO is always watching, right? And this is what I tell people, that the DAO decided that the chain should exist, but the DAO also holds the power to bring an end to the chain. So it is our responsibility, when we start building value for the community, to do things right by the community, to do ethical things, and to ensure that we build value or we create value in the right manner. Because if the DAO feels that we're not doing that, they can choose to fire the entire team,
Right.
including me and everybody else, right? So this is so important, that in this kind of a system, you need, I think every system needs to have checks and balances. Checks and balances is how democratic governments are built.
For
right?
sure.
And this is kind of why having this DAO is such a superpower for us, that there is this system of checks and balances, of a body which is continuously watching everything, right? And has the power, or rather the ultimate power, to make decisions. So,
Yeah, what's new is old again. What's old is new again. And checks and balances are certainly an ingredient that I think once we brought back in there, the whole thing seems much less like a private island and more like a real kind of republic. And that's really what we aim to do in Web3 in general, which is a republics of republics.
yes.
Different organization, different optimization for different types of use cases and environment and people. But at the end of the day, this is a common that is being curated. There's it's like the Earth we live in. It's still a shared space that we do. So, really, really interesting. And thank you so much for your time today. And with the community, we thank you for your time and attention as we bring builders and people working on the forefront of Web3 to try to bring it to the next level. Take the technology that we so certain is the ingredient that we have, and actually come up with a new recipe that becomes a big hit. And hopefully it's healthy for people and tasty for the experience. Fun for the gamers, right? That's what we aim to do. And again, we do this podcast every 2 weeks, and we want to share the latest and greatest. And until next time, thank you for your time and attention. Take care.